Most of us lock doors and assume that's enough. Tonight's 3 stories challenge that small, safe habit. These are true style accounts, people who found someone where they shouldn't be. Keep the lights on. The first thing I remember is the coffee maker humming like the house's heartbeat. It was 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, and the world outside our bedroom window was the color of a sound turned down. Our son, Max, slept in his twin bed with his stuffed rabbit tucked awkwardly under his chin. My wife, Laura, had been restless. Night nurse shifts do that. She slept on the living room couch more nights than not. I had dozed off with the TV low and a list of tomorrow's tasks blinking in my brain. 3:12 a.m. I woke because the kitchen light clicked on. I don't know how long I lay there pretending to be asleep before I heard the kitchen chairs scrape like someone was trying not to be loud and failing. We live in a single-family house that's older than either of us. The stairs have a little complaint when you go down, and the hallway sounds are familiar as family members. This was not a family sound. The rational part of me had a dozen mundane answers. Maybe a neighbor came to use our phone. Maybe we had left the back door unsecured in a hurry. I shrugged myself awake and eased out of bed barefoot because politely loud shoes feel like provocation in a house at that hour. My phone showed 3:14. From the bedroom, the hall looked like a painting of night. The kitchen light made a yellow rectangle through the doorway. On the sink, someone had left a cup. Our cup, tall and thin with lipstick faint on the rim. My favorite mug. I froze like it was a test. The coffee maker had been turned on, the small red light buzzing. There was a faint perfume on the back of the chair. Something floral. Not Laura's. Not mine. I walked into the kitchen, and the living room doorway was a black rectangle. There was a small movement, the sound of a foot coming off the carpet and the hush of movement. The front door, which we always locked, was latched and the deadbolt turned inside. We had no open window. The dog slept in his basket, snoring with the steady rhythm I had learned to match when I was too anxious to sleep. I called Laura in a whisper. She didn't answer. The person in the kitchen moved, and in the brief cut of acoustic space, I heard the person say something like, "She's sleeping." Not to me, not a whisper meant to be heard. It was a comment into the air, like a reading. The voice was low and careful. I moved to the breakfast bar and caught sight of the silhouette of someone through the doorway, thin, hunched by the pantry. When she turned her head, the light from the stove caught the side of a face, but not enough for me to say what she looked like. She moved with the confidence of someone who had been inside houses and learned to let walls be the map of her nights. I did something I wish I hadn't. I did not run for the phone. I flipped the kitchen light off because maybe the person would become less obvious. Instead, I stepped back and tried to breathe like my chest had not learned a new rhythm. I'd seen enough TV to understand the gestures that want to make you be brave and keep you quiet. My hand found the key ring under the bowl by the door. The metal felt ordinary under the skin. The person in the kitchen opened the refrigerator and pulled out a pale pack of sandwiches. She moved with casualness, like someone helping herself from a place she had a right to. A small sound like someone whispering into the refrigerator escaped. My head swam with the kinds of questions that do not help. The slow release of a breath. The person walked out of the kitchen and into the hallway, passing outside the bedroom with her hand hovering over the doorframe. I watched her through the shadow of the doorway, and the thought lodged. How long has she been here? Hours? Days? She did not go to the living room where Laura slept on the couch. Instead, she passed by the stairwell and turned to the left where Max's room was down the hall. For a second, my mind wrote a film, and then my legs decided to move. I stepped forward and said, "Hey!" My voice cracked like a plastic toy. The person didn't startle. She looked up as if someone had called her by nickname. She smiled, not a mugging smile, but the kind of practiced, too polite smile that fits a shape that wants to be remembered politely. "Sorry," she said. "I'll leave. Didn't mean to wake anyone." Calm, normal. She shut the fridge door gently and walked to the back hallway. At the back door, she hesitated, looked back, and waved at us in a way that might have been friendly. Then the latch depressed, the bolt turned, and the person was gone. After she left, we called the police. They came and measured and sniffed and asked the normal questions about open windows and missing items. Laura woke at the noise and sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her and didn't ask why the living room lamp had been on because she could see the outline of a note on the table. The police dusted surfaces and swabbed for prints. They took the cup and packaged it like an artifact. The K9 unit did a sweep and found no scent trail that gave them comfort. What gnawed at me wasn't that someone had been in our house. It was that she had been there like a guest. She took 2 slices of bread and left the cup. She'd eased herself across the edge of our lives and made a small domestic choice. Nothing violent, nothing stolen, a few crumbs of presence. She had the audacity to make herself small and observational, like a bookmark folded into the spine of our routine. Over the next week, we discovered small changes. A shoe moved near the back stair. A towel folded differently. A hair clip on the stairs that didn't belong to Laura or me. When we reviewed the baby monitor footage at full speed, we found a bad quality. Grainy clip where something drifts across the hallway like a shadow and then peeks into the door frame at 2:48 a.m., the crowning of their small progress. The timestamp did not match the time we saw them at 3:14 a.m., and the gap in time suggested one thing. She had been in our house earlier and left and then came back. Someone had been using our house as a place to come and go. We installed motion sensors and extra locks and slept with a lamp on for a month. The police suggested it could be a neighbor with a problem, a transient with nowhere to stay, someone fishing for a payday. They offered a form of comfort. No psychiatric diagnosis, no sign of real malice. We tried to accept it, but when you know someone's standing in the kitchen and choosing which sandwich to take, you don't get the comfort of reasonable risk calculations. You wake up with the knowledge that whichever wall you press your ear to might be occupied. Months later, a neighbor called to say police were following a person who had been living out of the trunk of his car. When they pried the trunk, the man had a stack of thin notes, lists of houses and times. In one of those bundles was a crumpled napkin with our street name on it. The police kept quiet about details. They said some things out loud and left the rest as things you could piece together if you wanted to. Sometimes I wake up and sit with the kettle on the stove like someone testing the world. I wonder if there are people who leave gentle claws into the fabric of others' lives because they prefer shade to daylight. I don't have an answer, only a small shelf of vigilance, and the sound of Laura's breath on the couch like a timepiece I never wanted. Not all intruders want to steal objects. Some take your peace. I set up security cameras because I travel for work and because my wife asked me to stop pretending. We were immune to the small crimes that touch people without notice. We bought cheap but decent cameras that stored footage in the cloud and pinged our phones when they saw motion. The cameras made me feel sensible. I liked the buttons and the ability to rewind my own life like a safety net. A week after we installed them, the app pinged at 4:03 a.m. on a Sunday. I was in the kitchen with a bowl of late-night cereal, too awake and too wired to sleep. The notification glowed on my thumb like a small sting of modern life. I opened the feed and watched the hallway from the angle the camera had been mounted above the stairwell. At first, there was static. Then, at 3:59 a.m., a thin figure appears at the edge of the frame. Not a shadow, a person. Tall, hoodie up, hands in pockets, like someone trying to be part of the night. He stood in the hall and turned his head slowly, looking at the living room door as if choosing the point of entrance. He had the strange, steady gait you notice in footage, like this grown accustomed to being unseen. I froze. I replayed the clip. The person walked forward and paused outside my downstairs bathroom where a cheap wall calendar hung. He lifted a hand and touched the corner of a monthly square, January 12th. He peeled a small tab off as if it were a sticker. It was the sort of small, petty theft that hurts in an odd, domestic way. Why take a small tab? My brain asked. Because some people gather evidence of being somewhere, I answered myself. The person shuffled toward the kitchen, pausing to look at a framed photo on the console. He reached out and smoothed a corner, a tender, bizarre gesture like someone reading a secret he wished to keep. Then he moved to the living room and sat on the edge of the couch. My couch crossed his legs and looked directly at the camera. You need to understand that looking at a camera in your own house is more intimate than it sounds. It is an acknowledgement. This person looked into the lens for 4 seconds at 4:07 a.m. and smiled like someone who had made a private joke. Then he stood, walked to the front hall, and left by the side door. The whole clip was 12 minutes long, and when the police watched with me, their faces tightened. We had the footage saved and played it for the responding officer. He frowned and said the man had a limp. If you watch especially at 4:02, you can see a slight hitch in the left step. The officer logged it and said he would send the clip to the cyber unit. The cloud storage gave us timestamps and exact moments. We were not left to memory. We had a document that said someone had been in our home that night, had touched our things, and had looked into our camera. The police had questions. Did we have anything missing? Had anyone reported suspicious persons in the neighborhood? We said no and no. They took the footage, printed frames, and marked the person with little sticky notes. They asked us to be careful and offered an encouragement disguised as a suggestion. Turn off auto-download of footage so we wouldn't get pinged in the middle of the night and sleep less. We followed the process. We uploaded stills to a community watch forum, and someone recognized the hoodie. A man who used to live down the county line and had been under observation by a certain social service group. The detective called me 2 days later and said they had pulled a partial match from a nearby burglary and that the limp matched the man's medical notes. We had him on camera 3 more times over the next month. Each time he was more brazen. He sat in our living room and read a magazine. He rearranged a cushion to a slight angle. He left a handwritten note with no clear words but a date, March 9th. It felt less like burglary and more like someone constructing a life within our life, a collage of small, invasive gestures. We installed stronger locks and an interior door alarm. The man never returned to the house while the alarm was on. Later, in a later following of the man, detectives found a crawl space under an abandoned storefront where someone had constructed a tiny bed and a wall of Polaroid shots of interiors, doorways, clocks. The detectives said the man had been living in other people's edges, doorways, porches, hedges, and he used cameras to make sure they were empty. Then he returned to linger. What unsettled me was how ordinary the footage made it all seem. A man reading a magazine, a hand smoothing a corner of a photograph. These are actions a guest might do. In the footage, he laughed quietly at something he saw on the TV in the background, like a person who belongs there. But he didn't belong. Months later, they arrested him on a different charge. The detectives called us in to identify his effects, and we saw that the man's collection included a few of our things. A fork, the January 12th calendar tab, and a Polaroid of our living room taken at 3:59 a.m. The idea of your home as a quiet museum of souvenirs someone else keeps is what keeps me awake longer than footage does. We keep the cameras on now because the footage keeps us honest. But every time the app pings at 4 a.m., I jump. The camera was supposed to be a deterrent. It became a witness to our violation. It recorded the man in our house, and that evidence felt safer than nothing, but not nearly safe enough. Cameras catch some things, not everything. We rented a row house above a bakery, 2 floors and a rooftop patio that smelled like butter in fall. It was a cheap place, old radiator, crooked floors, but we liked it because we could walk to the river. The landlord was nearly phlegmatic in his generosity. Keys left in a bowl and a shrug about wear and tear. We trusted the locks because we trusted the man who'd handed them over. One winter night, I woke to a noise like a fingernail dragged across plaster. For a second, I thought it was the pipes. The bedroom floor had a certain familiarity, one that feels safe, and the noise was not familiar. My bedside clock read 2:21 a.m. My wife Lydia slept with her hair fanned over the pillow. The apartment was warm and closed in the proper way a night home should be. The noise came again, this time like a creak, the sound of pressure on an old door. I rolled out of bed and peered across at the locked bedroom door. We always used the old deadbolt because the lock on the knob had failed half a dozen owners ago, and the deadbolt felt like an old friend. The deadbolt was in place, but there was a slow movement. The top edge of the door shifted a fraction, like someone pushing from the other side and then giving up. The bolt made a small metallic complaint, and then the door shivered. I remember the tiny mental calculations that you do when fear is new to you. Is someone trying to get in? Is the wind doing it? The windows were latched. The building was between other buildings. The sound was not the wind. I reached for my phone and it was dead. The battery read like a clock's lie, 1% and a silence. I slid out of bed and in my socks walked to the door. The hallway beyond smelled faintly of dough and sugar from downstairs. The house had a softness in the night, steps muffled by old rugs. The doorknob had a small scratch near the bottom like someone had tried to pick it once, long ago. When I put my ear to the door, I heard very faintly the sound of breath and the squeak of a shoe. Not outside, not in the building's public spaces. The breathing was close enough that it could have been a person holding their breath and counting. For a second, my mind offered the consolations. Perhaps the landlord had come to check a leak. Perhaps a coin-operated boiler man had reasons. None of those explanations held with the rhythm of the breaths. The door moved again, very slowly, an inch. The deadbolt whined like a small animal and the latch began to retract on its own. I backed away like the proper animal and bumped my hip against the dresser. My hand found the old brass lamp and I gripped it like a weapon. The bolt slid free. The knob turned less than half an inch and then clicked as the door eased open a few inches. The opening revealed the hallway and the faint pool of building light beyond. Nothing stood in the hall. The apartment felt empty and staged, like a theater set waiting for an actor who had left. I held my breath and watched the empty corridor and the door's edge as if that would be enough. I walked out the threshold and into the hall. My breath sounded loud and ugly. I called the landlord's name, but only the pipes answered. Downstairs, we saw footprints leading out into the alley. They were damp and small and at regular intervals, like someone had been practicing the art of being tiny. They stopped at the back gate and picked up in a neat rhythm until the gate's latch clanged. I thought, a clever thief. A thief who used the alley and knew the old back gate. But the crime wasn't the footprints. The thing that chewed my insides was the note left on our kitchen counter the next morning. Stiff paper folded in three like a manila ritual. On it, a single scrawl. You should sleep better. The landlord fitted a new bolt after we left a week later. The police checked the alley and the gate and found no one. The bank had no suspicious withdrawals. The note felt like a thin end of something larger. The idea that someone could open your locked door when you slept and leave a remark on the kitchen counter like a man who'd cleared his throat in someone else's living room is the sort of breach that rearranges faith. We moved out 2 months later for small reasons: drafty windows, the rent creeping up, but mostly because sleep felt like a loan we could no longer make. Sometimes I wake up and imagine the bolt sliding and the slow, patient lift of a knob, like a tide stealing the line between your private life and anything else. I keep a lamp by the door now and a pair of shoes near the bed. The small rituals are ridiculous and they are necessary. These were 3 disturbing true-style stories of break-ins, the kind that leave you awake long after the police leave. If you've experienced something similar, email your story to scaredalessamond@gmail.com. Keep names private if you wish. Please subscribe for more true scary stories. Good night.